In today's video, we're going to be doing a review of finding area again. And before we get started on the ones from today, let's talk a little bit about the previous lesson, so 1.2. First, how many dimensions are there for area? How many dimensions are there for area? Well, as we talked about yesterday, there are two dimensions. Two dimensions for area. And why are there two dimensions for area? Area has two dimensions because it has both length and it has width. Okay, so it has length and width. And when we measure area, what do we use to measure area? If you remember, we use squares to measure area. Okay, so let's jump in with the first problem here. We have a rectangle that's 2 centimeters wide and 3.5 centimeters long. And the strategy we used yesterday was just counting the squares. And we didn't talk about this in the previous video, but if they don't include all the squares, you can always go ahead and just finish it off on your own. And then we can count these up. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then this one is a half, and this one is also a half based on this. So 2 halves make a whole. So this would be 7 centimeters squared. Remember, we have to measure that with our squares. And this exponent right here shows that it's squares. It also shows that it's two dimensions, okay, length and width. Because
now we need to talk about the next part of the problem. They ask you to come up with a number sentence. And a number sentence is basically just a fancy way of number sentence is a fancy way of writing a fancy way to say math problem. So with a problem like this, there's two ways that we can do it. We can see that there's 2 centimeters here, and with our squares, that gives us 2 rows, and it gives us 2 rows of 3.5 centimeters. So one way to do a number sentence would be 3.5 plus 3.5, oops, 3.5 plus 3.5, and that would give us our 7. And we have to remember to label it with centimeters squared because we're talking about area. Another way that we could write this, and later on as we progress through our lessons, we're going to be talking about a formula for area, and it's going to be length times width. We've been talking about squares right now, but another thing we could do is just take the 3.5 centimeters. So we could take 3.5 centimeters, and there's 2 of those, just like the addition, so we could go 3.5 times 2, and both of those are going to equal 7. So either method that you choose for your number sentences would work. You could do 3.5 plus 3.5, or for this one, you could also do 3.5 times 2.
on to our next problem here. And for this one, we have 2 1/3 feet long and 3 feet wide. So again, you don't have to. You can finish in the rest of the squares. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 whole squares, and then each one of those is a third. So 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. So we haven't done this on the other ones, but we could write 6 3/3. That would be an okay to write it. Or, of course, you can make the 3/3 one and just write it as 7. And so then this would be 7 feet squared. Our two dimensions, it has length and width, so we're talking about area. Now, some people will start to do some different things besides just counting squares, and that's totally okay. Later on, as we do more with area, we'll talk about some different strategies as well.
So again, for this one, we have to come up with another number sentence. And as you can tell, I've made some mistakes in this video already. So we're going to kind of talk about what I just mentioned previously, my mistake. But again, we have to come up with a number sentence. And going with our whole number here, we've got 3 feet. So we've got 3 rows. And in each row, there's 2.5 or 2 1/3 feet. So one number sentence, we could come up with this problem, and then I didn't get that erased in the previous one. So we could go 2 1/3, and we could do that 3 times, plus 2 1/3, plus 2 1/3, and that's going to give us 6 3/3, or like was mentioned previously, we could go 7. And again, we have to label it with our feet squared because we're talking about area. And area has 2 dimensions. Or, again, to find area, you can also do some multiplying. So we could take our 3 feet, and actually I'm going to start with the 2 1/3. So we can go 2 1/3, 2 1/3 times 3, and that's going to leave us with 7 again. And we won't forget our label, 7 feet squared.
Now, for the practice part of the home link, we're doing some conversions. And this one in particular, we're doing feet to inches or inches to feet. And remember, we have 1 foot is the same thing as 12 inches. And one thing that I like to think about this is which direction we're going. So, for example, in this problem, we're going from feet to inches, feet to inches. So when we go from feet to inches, the number gets bigger. It goes from 1 to 12. It gets bigger. So when we're converting, if the number gets bigger, we're still talking about the same amount. It's just stated in a different way. So 1 foot is equal to 12 inches, but the number 1 is smaller than 12. So the number gets bigger. That means we're going to have to multiply. And in this case, we multiply by the biggest number. So if we're going from feet to inches, the number gets bigger, so we multiply. We multiply by 12, so we take 4 times 12, which is 48. Then in the next example, we go 24 inches to feet. So when we're going from inches to feet, the number is getting smaller. And when we're converting, we either multiply or divide. So since the number is getting smaller, for this time we're going to divide. And we're going to take our starting number here, 24. We're going to divide that by 12. And that, of course, is 2. So 24 inches is the same as 2 feet. Then the last one here, 30 inches to feet. Again, we're going from inches to feet, so the number gets smaller, okay? So we can start thinking about dividing. But if we do 30 divided by 12, we don't get a whole number answer. So there's a number of different things we can do for this. For today, we're going to talk about how many 12s can we get in from 30. So we can go 12, 24. So that's 2. That gives me 2 whole groups of 12. And then 6 inches are left. 30 minus 24 is 6. So I can write that right here. We started with 30 inches. We used 2 feet, which is 24 inches. So if we take that away, that leaves us with 6 inches. So 6 is half of 12. So we could go 2.5 feet. Later on in the year, we'll do some more things with division and things like that. But for today, there's one way you can think about it. If you have any questions, make sure you let your teacher know, and have a good evening.